The dust cloud rose behind the stagecoach as it rattled into Mineral Point, Wisconsin on a sweltering August afternoon in 1872, carrying a young woman whose heart was as scarred as the rough frontier landscape she'd come to escape. Catherine Grayson pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the mining town materialize through the haze. At 23 years old, she carried herself with the practiced composure of someone who had learned to hide her deepest wounds beneath layers of propriety. The letter from her aunt crinkled in her reticule, the invitation to start fresh in this lead mining settlement far from Boston society, and the whispered diagnosis that had shattered her world 6 months earlier. After the riding accident that had left her bedridden for weeks, 3 different physicians had delivered the same devastating verdict. The internal injuries meant she would never bear children. Her fiancé had withdrawn his proposal within a fortnight, and the pitying glances from her mother's friends had become unbearable. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Mineral Point Hotel, and Catherine gathered her carpetbag with trembling fingers. The frontier town sprawled before her in all its rough-hewn glory, buildings constructed of the local limestone giving the place a sturdy, permanent feel despite the wild nature of the Wisconsin territory it had been carved from. Miners moved along the wooden sidewalks, their faces weathered by sun and labor, while wagons creaked past loaded with ore from the surrounding hills. "Miss Grayson," a woman's voice called out, and Catherine turned to see her Aunt Margaret hurrying toward her, arms outstretched. The embrace was warm and genuine, smelling of lavender and fresh bread, and for the first time in months, Catherine felt some of the tightness in her chest ease. "The journey was long," Catherine murmured as they separated, "but I'm grateful to be here." Margaret studied her niece's face with knowing eyes. "You'll find Mineral Point different from Boston. People here care more about what you can do than where you came from. Come, I've prepared the spare room at my house. Tomorrow, I'll introduce you around town." The house was modest but comfortable, perched on a hillside overlooking the town. That evening, as Catherine unpacked her belongings, she found herself drawn to the window. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed as cowboys drove them toward their pens. The sound was foreign and strangely comforting. "There's a ranch just beyond town," Margaret said from the doorway, having noticed Catherine's interest. "The Granger spread. The owner passed 2 years ago and his son runs it now. Good man, from what I hear, keeps to himself mostly but fair in his dealings." Catherine nodded absently, turning back to her unpacking. Romance was the furthest thing from her mind. What man would want a woman who could never give him children? She had resigned herself to spinsterhood, to being the maiden aunt who helped raise other people's babies. This move to Wisconsin was about finding a purpose beyond motherhood, perhaps teaching or helping her aunt with the boarding house she managed. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Margaret took Catherine into town to introduce her to the shopkeepers and townspeople. The general store was run by a cheerful German immigrant named Mr. Hoffman, who welcomed Catherine warmly and insisted on giving her a peppermint stick for good luck in your new home. The dressmaker, a widow named Mrs. Chen, took Catherine's measurements and promised to alter some ready-made dresses to fit her slender frame properly. As they emerged from the millinery shop, a commotion erupted down the street. A horse had gotten spooked, rearing and bucking while its rider fought to maintain control. Catherine watched, heart pounding, as the animal careened toward a small boy who had wandered into the street, oblivious to the danger. Without thinking, Catherine dropped her parcels and ran forward, scooping the child up and diving toward the sidewalk. They landed in a tangle of skirts and dust just as the horse thundered past, its hooves striking the ground where the boy had been standing moments before. "Joshua!" a woman screamed, rushing forward to claim her son from Catherine's arms. "Oh, my lord, thank you, thank you." Catherine rose shakily, accepting Margaret's steadying hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs and her hands trembled with the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. "That was mighty brave, miss." A deep voice spoke behind her, and Catherine turned to find herself looking up into the most striking pair of green eyes she had ever seen. The man was tall, well over 6 feet, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the practical clothes of a working rancher, his shirt dusty from the trail, and he held his hat respectfully in his hands. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Catherine managed, though her voice came out breathier than she intended. Something about the genuine concern in his gaze made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with the near accident. "This is my niece, Catherine Grayson," Margaret interjected, her eyes twinkling with interest. "Catherine, this is James Granger. He owns the ranch I mentioned." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Grayson." James's voice was warm as summer honey. "Though I wish it were under calmer circumstances. You showed real courage just now." Catherine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Anyone would have done the same, maybe, but you're the one who did it." He smiled then, a slow, genuine expression that transformed his serious face into something dangerously handsome. "Welcome to Mineral Point. I hope you'll like it here." Before Catherine could respond, the horse's owner approached, apologizing profusely and thanking her repeatedly. By the time the crowd dispersed, James Granger had retrieved his supplies from the general store and was mounting a big sorrel gelding. He tipped his hat to Catherine before riding off, and she found herself watching until he disappeared around the corner. "That," Margaret said with satisfaction, "is a very good man. Works dawn to dusk on that ranch, trying to build it up to something more than his father left. He comes to town once a week for supplies and never causes trouble." Catherine picked up her scattered parcels, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach. "I'm sure he's very respectable. More than that, he's lonely, I think. His father was a hard man by all accounts. James has been running that ranch alone since he was 21. He's 26 now, and I've never known him to court anyone seriously." "Aunt Margaret," Catherine said firmly, "I'm not in Mineral Point to find a husband. I'm here to build a new life on my own terms." Margaret squeezed her niece's hand gently. "Sometimes life has plans we don't expect, dear. Just keep your heart open." But Catherine's heart felt anything but open as they walked home. The physician's words echoed in her mind like a death knell. "The damage is too severe. You'll never conceive a child." What kind of life could she offer any man, let alone one who probably wanted sons to help work his ranch and carry on his name? The following week brought a rhythm to Catherine's days. She helped Margaret with the boarding house, taking over the account books, and discovering a talent for organization that had never been tested in her privileged Boston upbringing. She also began teaching basic reading and arithmetic to some of the miners' children in the afternoons, using Margaret's parlor as a makeshift classroom. The work was fulfilling in ways she hadn't anticipated, and the children's eager faces made her smile even as they reminded her of what she would never have. It was on a Thursday afternoon, as she was helping hang laundry in Margaret's back garden, that Catherine heard the distinctive sound of a horse approaching. She looked up to find James Granger dismounting near the gate, a large package wrapped in brown paper under his arm. "Afternoon, Miss Grayson," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Is your aunt at home?" "She's inside," Catherine replied, wiping her damp hands on her apron. "Shall I fetch her?" "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you as well." He approached, and Catherine noticed the way his work-worn hands handled the package with surprising gentleness. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you were teaching some of the children. I thought these might be useful." He handed her the package, and when Catherine unwrapped it, she gasped. Inside were a dozen slate boards and a box of chalk, along with 3 primers and a well-worn copy of McGuffey's Reader. "Mr. Granger, this is too generous," she protested, even as her fingers traced the cover of one of the books. "I cannot accept such an expensive gift." "It's not a gift exactly," James said, shifting his weight in a way that made him seem younger, almost bashful. My mother was a teacher before she married. These were hers. She died when I was 12 and they've been sitting in a trunk in my attic ever since. She would have wanted them used, wanted children to learn. When Mrs. Chen told me what you were doing, it seemed like the right thing to bring them to you. Catherine looked up at him, seeing past the capable rancher to the boy who had lost his mother too young. Then I accept them gratefully, and I promise they'll be well used. Your mother must have been a special woman. She was. James's expression softened with memory. She used to say that education was the key to building something better than what you were born into. My father disagreed. He thought book learning was a waste when there was work to be done. But she taught me anyway by lamplight after dinner when he was asleep. I'm glad she did, Catherine said quietly. Thank you for sharing this with me and with the children. They stood there for a moment, the late afternoon sun slanting golden across the garden, and Catherine felt something shift between them. It was not the passionate surge of romance novels, but something quieter and deeper, like recognizing a kindred spirit. Miss Grayson, James said, turning his hat in his hands, I was wondering if you might like to see the ranch sometime. It's beautiful country out that way, and I thought you might enjoy a ride. Your aunt would be welcome to accompany us, of course. Catherine's first instinct was to refuse. What was the point of encouraging any sort of attachment when she had nothing to offer? But the hopeful look in his eyes, coupled with the genuine friendship he seemed to be extending, made her hesitate. I would like that, she heard herself say. Though I should warn you, I haven't ridden since my accident. I'm not sure I remember how. I've got a mare gentle as a lamb, James assured her. Rosie could carry a sack of feathers and still step careful, and I'll be right there beside you. They arranged for the following Sunday afternoon, and as James rode away, Catherine found Margaret watching from the kitchen window with a knowing smile. Don't start, Catherine warned as she carried the books inside. He's being neighborly, that's all. Neighborly, Margaret repeated, her tone suggesting she believed no such thing. That man rode all the way into town on his one day of rest to bring you teaching supplies. James Granger doesn't do anything without purpose, dear. Catherine busied herself examining the slate boards, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. She could not let herself hope. Hope was dangerous when reality was so immutable. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, clear and warm with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of prairie grass and wildflowers. James appeared promptly at 2 o'clock, leading 2 horses as promised. Rosie was indeed a gentle-looking bay mare with a white star on her forehead, and Catherine found her nervousness easing as she approached the animal. Take your time, James said softly. Let her get to know you first. Catherine stroked Rosie's velvet nose, murmuring greetings while the mare huffed warm breath against her palm. With James's patient guidance, she managed to mount without too much awkwardness, though she was acutely aware of his hands steadying her waist as she settled into the saddle. Margaret had declined to join them, claiming a headache that Catherine suspected was entirely fabricated, so they set off alone toward the open country beyond town. Catherine's initial stiffness gradually melted as Rosie's smooth gait and James's steady presence beside her rekindled muscle memory from her childhood riding lessons. You're a natural, James observed after they had been riding for 20 minutes. Or you were, once upon a time. I loved riding when I was young, Catherine admitted. My father kept horses in Boston and I rode nearly every day until the accident. What happened? James asked gently. Only if you want to talk about it. Catherine had not spoken of it to anyone except her family and the physicians, but something about the vast open landscape and James's quiet acceptance made the words come easier. I was riding in a park near my home. A dog ran out from the bushes and spooked my horse. He bolted and I lost my seat. I fell badly, landed on some rocks. She took a breath, the old pain ghosting through her abdomen. I was bedridden for weeks. The doctors said I was lucky to survive, but there was internal damage. They told me I would never be able to have children. The words hung in the air between them, and Catherine waited for the inevitable retreat, the polite expression that would shutter James's open face as he realized she was damaged goods. Instead, he reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. His grip was warm and strong, calloused from ranch work but infinitely gentle. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said simply. "It must have been terrifying, and then to face such news on top of it all. That takes real strength to bear." Catherine blinked back sudden tears. "Most people offer pity or platitudes. My fiancé ended our engagement. Then he was a fool." James's voice held an edge of anger. "A woman is more than her ability to bear children. You're brave and kind and clever. You saved that boy last week without a thought for your own safety. You're teaching children who might never have had a chance to learn otherwise. Those things matter, Miss Grayson. They matter a great deal." The tears spilled over then, and Catherine found herself laughing and crying at the same time. "You hardly know me, Mr. Granger." "I know enough," he said firmly, "and I'd like to know more if you'll let me." They rode on in companionable silence, James still holding her hand as their horses walked side by side. The Granger ranch spread out before them, hundreds of acres of rolling hills dotted with cattle and crossed by a clear stream that sparkled in the afternoon light. The house itself was sturdy limestone, 2 stories with a wide porch that overlooked the prettiest view Catherine had ever seen. "My grandfather built the house," James explained as they dismounted. "He was one of the first miners to settle in Mineral Point back in the 40s, made his fortune in lead, then bought this land cheap because everyone else was chasing gold in California. He wanted to raise cattle, build something that would last. It's beautiful," Catherine said honestly, taking in the well-maintained barn, the orderly corrals, the vegetable garden thriving behind the house. "You've clearly worked hard to keep it up." "It's been my whole life," James admitted, leading the horses to water. "After my mother died, my father turned cold. He worked us both like dogs, but nothing was ever good enough for him. When he passed, I thought I'd feel relieved. Instead, I just felt alone." Catherine understood that loneliness. It was the same hollow feeling she had carried since her diagnosis, the sense of being set apart from the normal flow of life. They spent the afternoon walking the property, James pointing out improvements he had made and plans he had for the future. He wanted to expand the herd, to breed better stock that could command premium prices at market. He talked about building a better irrigation system for the garden, about eventually adding chickens and maybe some pigs. His passion for the ranch was evident in every word, and Catherine found herself caught up in his vision. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they sat on the porch steps, sharing canteens of cool water and slices of the apple cake Margaret had sent along. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine said, gathering her courage. "Why are you being so kind to me? You must want children of your own someday to help with the ranch and carry on your family name. Why spend time with a woman who can never give you that?" James was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant hills. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful and measured. "My father used to say that a woman's only value was in the sons she could bear. He treated my mother like breeding stock, and when she had trouble carrying babies after me, he grew cruel. She lost 3 children after I was born, and each time he blamed her, shamed her. It broke something in her, I think, made her smaller and sadder until she just faded away." He turned to look at Catherine directly, his green eyes intense. "I swore when I was a boy that I would never judge a woman that way, would never reduce someone to their ability to give me children. Life is more than that, Miss Grayson. A partnership is about respect and affection and shared dreams. If children come, that's a blessing. But if they don't, well, there are other ways to build a legacy." Catherine felt her heart crack open, years of shame and grief pouring out. "I wanted to be a mother," she whispered. "More than anything, and when they told me I couldn't, I felt like my life was over before it had really begun." "Your life isn't over," James said firmly. "It's just taking a different path than you expected. That doesn't make it less valuable or less full of possibility." He stood and offered her his hand. "Come inside. There's something I want to show you." The interior of the house was neat but sparse, furnished with heavy pieces that looked like they had been there for decades. James led her upstairs to a small bedroom that had clearly once belonged to a child. A narrow bed stood against one wall, a wooden toy chest beneath the window, and shelves lined with books and treasures. "This was my room," James explained. "After my mother died, I couldn't bear to change anything, but look here." He gestured to the walls where pencil marks climbed upward in careful increments, each one dated and initialed. "She measured me every birthday, marked how much I had grown, and here." He opened the toy chest to reveal carefully carved wooden animals, a child's primer with his name written in careful script, a collection of smooth river stones. "She saved everything I made or found, told me each treasure was important because I was important." Catherine's throat tightened as she understood what he was showing her. "She loved you very much." She did. "And she never had another child after me, but that didn't make her less of a mother or less of a woman. She poured all her love into me and into her teaching and into this ranch. She made flowers grow in the harshest soil and taught me to read by firelight. She was everything good in my childhood, and she only had one child." He closed the toy chest gently. "What I'm trying to say, Miss Grayson, is that I don't measure a woman's worth by her womb. I measure it by her character, her kindness, her strength. And from what I've seen of you, you have all those things in abundance." Catherine could not stop the tears this time. She had carried the shame of her infertility like a stone around her neck for months, had internalized every pitying look and withdrawn marriage proposal as proof of her inadequacy. But James was offering her something different: acceptance without conditions, respect without reservations. "Thank you," she managed. "You cannot know how much that means to me." "I think I can," James said softly. He reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture so tender that Catherine felt something bloom in her chest, fragile and tentative but undeniably real. They rode back to town as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, and when James helped Catherine dismount outside Margaret's house, his hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "May I call on you again?" he asked. "Properly, I mean. Not just as neighbors, but as a man courting a woman he admires." Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs. Every practical instinct told her to refuse, to protect them both from inevitable disappointment. But the hope in James's eyes and the warmth still glowing in her chest made her brave. "I would like that very much," she said. James's smile was brilliant even in the gathering darkness. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, the gesture old-fashioned and sweetly formal. "Then I'll see you at church tomorrow morning, Miss Grayson. Sleep well." Catherine practically floated into the house, where Margaret was waiting with poorly concealed excitement. "Well," her aunt demanded. "How was the ranch?" "Beautiful," Catherine said, and she was not just talking about the land. The weeks that followed established a pattern that became precious to Catherine. James came to town twice a week now instead of once, timing his visits to coincide with her teaching sessions so he could walk her home afterward. They took Sunday rides that grew longer and more adventurous as Catherine's confidence in the saddle returned. He brought her wildflowers and interesting stones, listened attentively when she talked about her students' progress, and shared stories about the ranch that made her laugh. It was courting in the truest sense, a gradual building of friendship and trust that slowly deepened into something more profound. James never pushed for more than Catherine was ready to give, content with held hands and stolen moments of conversation. But Catherine could feel the attraction growing between them, a magnetic pull that made her pulse quicken when he was near and left her restless when he was not. The town had noticed their courtship, of course. Mineral Point was too small for secrets, and the sight of James Granger spending time with Margaret's pretty niece had tongues wagging with approval. Mrs. Chen winked when she saw them together. Mr. Hoffman slipped Catherine extra peppermints for your gentleman friend. Even the children in her makeshift classroom, giggled and whispered when James appeared at the door. But alongside the approval, Catherine detected whispers of another kind. She overheard two women talking outside the millinery shop, their voices carrying through the open window. "Shame about that Grayson girl," one said. "Margaret told my sister the truth of why she left Boston. Accident left her barren." "Poor James Granger," the other replied. "Finally shows interest in a woman and she cannot give him children. You know he'll need sons to work that ranch." Catherine had fled before hearing more, but the words burrowed under her skin like splinters. That evening, when James arrived to take her for a walk, she was distant and distracted. "What's troubling you?" he asked finally, guiding her to a bench overlooking the valley. "You've been somewhere else all evening." Catherine twisted her hands in her lap. "People are talking. They say I'm wasting your time, that you need a woman who can give you children." "People need to mind their own business," James said flatly. "What we have between us is nobody's concern but ours." "But they're right, aren't they?" Catherine looked at him with anguished eyes. "You should be courting someone who can give you a family, someone whole and undamaged." James caught her face between his hands, his expression fierce. "You listen to me, Catherine Grayson. You are whole. You are not damaged. You are a strong, brilliant, beautiful woman, and I am falling in love with you. Not with some imaginary woman who might give me children, but with you. The woman who saves children from runaway horses and teaches reading with infinite patience and laughs at my terrible jokes." "You," Catherine's breath caught, "you're falling in love with me." "I am," James said simply. "Completely and thoroughly. And if you don't feel the same, I'll respect that and step back. But if there's any chance you might feel even a fraction of what I feel, then I'm asking you to let go of what those doctors said and those gossips whisper and just be here with me." "I do feel the same," Catherine whispered. "I'm terrified, but I do. I love you, James. I just don't want you to regret choosing me." "Never," he said fiercely, and then he was kissing her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Catherine melted into it, her hands clutching his shirt as the world narrowed to just the two of them, just this perfect moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Not someday, not eventually. Marry me this month, next week, tomorrow if you'll have me. I don't want to spend another day without you by my side." "Yes," Catherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in the small church at the heart of Mineral Point, with the whole town turning out to witness. Catherine wore a simple cream-colored dress that Mrs. Chen had sewn with record speed, adorned with wildflowers that James had gathered from the ranch. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony, and even taciturn Mr. Hoffman was seen wiping his eyes. The wedding breakfast at Margaret's house was a boisterous affair, with miners and ranchers crowding in to offer congratulations and advice. Catherine found herself swept up in a whirl of well wishes and laughter, but her eyes kept seeking James across the room. Each time their gazes met, he smiled at her with such love and pride that her heart felt too large for her chest. As evening approached, they rode out to the ranch together, Catherine seated before James on his big sorrel gelding, her head resting against his chest as the steady beat of his heart lulled her into contentment. "Are you nervous?" James murmured against her hair. "A little," Catherine admitted. "But more excited than nervous. I never thought I would have this, a wedding night, a husband who loves me." "I do love you," James said, tightening his arms around her. "More than I knew it was possible to love someone. You've brought light back into my life, Catherine. You've made that house feel like a home." The days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and Catherine discovered what it meant to be truly happy. Life on the ranch was hard work, but satisfying in ways her pampered Boston existence had never been. She learned to bake bread in the temperamental wood stove, to coax vegetables from the garden, to help James with the endless tasks that ranching demanded. Her body grew stronger from the physical labor, and her spirit healed in the vast quiet of the prairie. They settled into rhythms that felt natural and right. James taught Catherine to rope and brand cattle, patient with her clumsy first attempts. She continued teaching the miners' children in the afternoons, riding into town twice a week while James handled ranch work. In the evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sun set, talking about everything and nothing, building the foundation of their life together. Catherine had been honest with herself about her inability to conceive, and she had thought she had made peace with it. But as the months passed, and she watched neighbors' babies grow and heard about pregnancies throughout the town, the old grief would sometimes catch her unexpectedly. She would see James playing with a toddler at church and have to swallow back tears, imagining the children they would never have together. James always seemed to sense those moments. He would find excuses to touch her, to remind her of his presence and his love. On particularly hard days, he would take her riding to the highest point on the ranch, where they could see for miles in every direction. "We have this," he would say, gesturing at the vast landscape. "We have each other and this land and the life we're building. That's not nothing, Catherine. That's everything." And she would believe him, or at least want to believe him, and the pain would recede again. Winter came hard and early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by November. Catherine learned to navigate the drifts, bundled in layers of wool and fur, helping James break ice on water troughs and carry extra feed to the cattle. The work was exhausting, but there was a fierce beauty to the landscape under its white blanket, and the nights spent huddled close to the fire with James were cozy and intimate. It was during a particularly vicious blizzard in January that everything changed. James had gone out to check on the cattle in the far pasture, worried about some yearlings that had strayed near a gully. He had been gone for hours when Catherine began to worry, peering through the frost-covered windows at the whiteout conditions. She was pacing the kitchen when the door burst open, bringing a gust of snow and frigid air. James stumbled in, his coat white with snow, and cradled in his arms was a bundle that whimpered weakly. "Wolves," James gasped, kicking the door shut behind him. "Found them attacking the strays. This one was separated from the herd. She's hurt bad." He laid the bundle on the kitchen table, and Catherine hurried over to help unwrap it. A calf, no more than a few months old, lay shivering and bleeding from several gashes along her flanks and neck. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes rolling with pain and fear. "Get clean cloths and hot water," James ordered, already stripping off his soaked coat. "We need to clean these wounds and stitch what we can. She's in shock." They worked together through the night, Catherine holding the calf steady while James cleaned and sutured the worst of the wounds with steady hands. Catherine sang to the terrified animal soft nonsense songs that seemed to calm her trembling. They wrapped her in blankets and moved her near the stove, where the heat might help combat the shock. As dawn broke, the calf was still alive but weak. James had dozed off in a chair, exhausted from the rescue and the hours of work, but Catherine could not sleep. She sat on the floor beside the calf, stroking her soft ears and willing her to live. "Come on, little one," she whispered. "You're stronger than you look, I know you are. Fight for your life, fight." Whether it was the warmth or the nursing or pure stubbornness, the calf survived. Over the following weeks, she grew stronger, following Catherine around the house like a giant, clumsy puppy. James laughed at the sight of his wife hand feeding the calf with a bottle, the animal's enthusiastic suckling often knocking Catherine off balance. "She's yours now," he said one evening, watching Catherine brush the calf's coat. "She knows who saved her. What are you going to name her?" Catherine had not thought about names, but one came to her instantly. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." James smiled and pulled Catherine into his arms. "That's perfect and fitting because she's not the only miracle around here." Catherine looked up at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "I mean that watching you with that calf, seeing how much love you have to give, it reminds me every day that we're going to be all right. However our family grows, in whatever unexpected ways, we'll be all right because we have each other." Catherine buried her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent of leather and hay and home. She believed him, truly believed him for the first time. Spring arrived with dramatic suddenness, the snow melting into rushing streams and the prairie erupting in wildflowers. Catherine's garden flourished under her care, and the ranch prospered. They sold cattle at premium prices in May, and James used the profits to buy breeding stock and repair the barn roof. It was early June when Catherine first noticed the changes. She was queasy in the mornings, unable to stomach the coffee she normally loved. Her breasts were tender, and she felt exhausted even after a full night's sleep. She dismissed it as a lingering spring cold, but when Margaret came to visit and found her retching behind the house, her aunt's knowing look made Catherine's heart stutter. "How late are you?" Margaret asked gently. Catherine froze. "I don't know, I haven't been regular since the accident. The doctors said that was normal, that my cycles might never be predictable again." But possible, Catherine did not want to hope. Hope was dangerous, a knife that would cut deeper than any disappointment she had felt before. "They said I would never conceive. 3 doctors examined me and agreed." "Doctors can be wrong," Margaret said softly, "and God works in mysterious ways. You should see Dr. Patterson in town. Get a proper examination." Catherine resisted for another week, terrified of the confirmation one way or another. But when the morning sickness persisted and her clothes began to feel tight around the waist, she could no longer deny the possibility. She rode into town without telling James, not wanting to raise his hopes only to dash them. Dr. Patterson was a kindly man in his 50s who had delivered half the babies in Mineral Point. He examined Catherine thoroughly, asking detailed questions about her symptoms and her medical history. When he finally sat back, his expression was carefully neutral. "Miss Catherine, excuse me, Mrs. Granger," he said. "I believe you are with child, approximately 3 months along from what I can determine." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "That's impossible," Catherine whispered. The doctors in Boston were certain. "Medicine is not an exact science," Dr. Patterson said gently. "Bodies heal in unexpected ways. Whatever damage you sustained, it appears to have healed enough to allow conception. Now, I won't lie to you. Given your history, this pregnancy carries risks. You'll need to be careful, avoid heavy lifting and stress. But I see no reason why you shouldn't carry this baby to term." Catherine could not breathe. Tears streamed down her face, years of grief and longing pouring out in great gasping sobs. "You're certain, you're absolutely certain." "As certain as I can be at this stage. Congratulations, Mrs. Granger. You're going to be a mother." The ride back to the ranch passed in a blur. Catherine's mind was spinning, careening between elation and terror. She was pregnant. Impossible, miraculous, terrifying. She carried a child, James's child, beneath her heart. The thing she had been told would never happen was happening. James was mending fence near the house when she arrived. He looked up at the sound of her horse and immediately straightened, concern crossing his face at whatever he saw in her expression. "Catherine, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" She dismounted clumsily, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the reins. "I went to see Dr. Patterson." James was at her side in an instant, his hands steadying her. "What did he say? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." The words came out high and strained. "James, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby." For a long moment, James just stared at her, his face blank with shock. Then his expression crumpled, and he pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said hoarsely. "We're going to have a baby." "I know, I can't believe it. The doctors said it was impossible, but Dr. Patterson is sure, and I'm so scared, James. What if something goes wrong? What if I lose this baby? What if— SHH. James pulled back enough to cup her face, his own cheeks wet with tears. "We'll take it one day at a time. We'll be careful and trust in God, and whatever happens, we'll face it together. But right now, in this moment, we're going to celebrate this miracle, our miracle." He kissed her then, tender and reverent, and Catherine felt some of her fear ease. They would face this together, just as they had faced everything else. The pregnancy progressed slowly through the summer heat. Catherine followed Dr. Patterson's orders religiously, curtailing her more strenuous activities and resting when fatigue overtook her. James became almost comically protective, hovering whenever she lifted anything heavier than a teacup and insisting she stay off horses entirely. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Catherine protested after he tried to carry her over a puddle. "Your precious cargo," James countered, his hand resting possessively on the small swell of her stomach. "Both of you." Margaret visited frequently, bringing remedies for morning sickness and baby clothes she had been quietly collecting. The town rallied around them with enthusiasm, everyone apparently invested in the miracle baby that defied medical prediction. Mrs. Chen sewed tiny gowns, and Mr. Hoffman Special ordered a cradle from Milwaukee. As Catherine's belly grew, so did her confidence. The baby moved constantly, little flutters that became stronger kicks as the months passed. James would spend hours with his hand on her stomach, his face alight with wonder each time the baby stirred. "What do you think?" Catherine asked one evening as they lay in bed, James's palm spread across her taut abdomen. "Boy or girl, doesn't matter," James said firmly. "Healthy is all I care about, but if I'm guessing, I'd say a girl, a daughter as strong and brave as her mother." "Or a son as kind and steady as his father," Catherine countered, covering his hand with hers. The baby kicked hard against their joined hands, and they both laughed, the sound full of joy and anticipation. But as her due date approached in late autumn, Catherine's old fears resurfaced. She woke from nightmares about the birth going wrong, about losing the baby or dying herself. The doctors in Boston had been so certain that her damaged body could never safely carry a child, and though Dr. Patterson was optimistic, there were no guarantees. "Talk to me," James said after a particularly bad nightmare left her trembling and tearful. "Don't shut me out." "I'm afraid," Catherine admitted. "What if they were right all along? What if my body can't do this safely? What if I die giving birth and leave you alone?" James pulled her close, mindful of her swollen belly. "You're not going to die. Dr. Patterson says you're healthy and strong. Your body has been doing exactly what it's supposed to do for 8 months now. Trust it. Trust yourself." "I'm trying," Catherine whispered. "I know. And I'm going to be right there with you every moment. You're not going through this alone." The first contractions came on a crisp November morning, gentle waves that Catherine almost dismissed as false labor. But as the day progressed, they grew stronger and more regular. James sent for Dr. Patterson and Margaret, then stayed by Catherine's side as the labor intensified. It was long and hard, hours of pain that blurred together into an endless ordeal. Catherine clung to James's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. Margaret wiped her forehead with cool cloths and murmured encouragement. Dr. Patterson checked her progress with professional calm. "You're doing beautifully," he kept saying. "The baby's position is good, just a little more." But as night fell and the labor continued, complications arose. The baby's heartbeat grew erratic, and Catherine began bleeding more heavily than was normal. Dr. Patterson's expression grew grave, and he pulled James aside for a whispered conversation. "No," Catherine gasped, having heard enough to understand. "Don't you dare send him away. Whatever happens, he stays with me." James returned to her side immediately, his face pale but determined. "I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together, remember?" The final stage of labor was brutal. Catherine pushed with every ounce of strength she possessed, her body racked with pain and exhaustion. She screamed and sobbed and swore she could not do it. But James never let go of her hand, never stopped telling her how strong she was, how close they were to meeting their baby. And then, as the first light of dawn broke through the bedroom window, a thin, furious wail filled the air. "It's a girl," Dr. Patterson announced, holding up a tiny, squirming infant. "You have a daughter, Mrs. Granger." The baby was placed on Catherine's chest, warm and slippery and absolutely perfect. Catherine stared down at the small face, the rosebud mouth and tiny fists, and felt her heart explode with love so fierce it was almost frightening. "Our daughter," she breathed. "James, look at her." We have a daughter." James was crying openly, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the baby's dark, downy hair. "She's beautiful. She's absolutely perfect." Dr. Patterson worked to deliver the afterbirth and stop Catherine's bleeding, his movements efficient despite his own emotion. "She gave you quite a scare there at the end," he said. "But you did it, Mrs. Granger. You both did beautifully." Margaret bustled about, cleaning the baby and wrapping her in soft blankets before returning her to Catherine's arms. The infant had quieted, her unfocused gaze drifting between her parents' faces. James sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Catherine and his free hand cradling their daughter's tiny body. His face was transformed with wonder and gratitude. "They said you'd never conceive a child," he murmured, pressing a kiss to Catherine's sweaty forehead. "But here she is, our miracle, our beautiful daughter." "What should we name her?" Catherine asked, unable to look away from the baby's face. James was quiet for a long moment, then smiled. "Grace. Her name is Grace because she's a gift we never thought we'd receive." "Grace Margaret Granger," Catherine said, smiling at her aunt through happy tears. "It's perfect." The days following Grace's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Catherine had never imagined the all-consuming nature of new motherhood, the way her entire world would narrow to this tiny person who depended on her completely. James was a devoted father from the first moment, walking the floor with Grace when she fussed, changing her nappies without complaint, staring at her for hours as if he could not quite believe she was real. The town celebrated Grace's arrival with enthusiasm. Visitors arrived daily with gifts and advice, everyone wanting to see the miracle baby. Mrs. Chen brought a christening gown she had embroidered by hand. Mr. Hoffman's special ordered a silver rattle from Chicago. Even the miners stopped by to offer gruff congratulations and leave wildflowers on the porch. As winter settled over the ranch, the family of three found their rhythm. Catherine marveled at how naturally James had taken to fatherhood, the way his large, work-roughened hands could be so gentle with their tiny daughter. He sang to her in his rumbling baritone, songs his own mother had sung to him. He built a rocking cradle that fit perfectly beside their bed, ornately carved with flowers and birds. Grace grew rapidly, her unfocused newborn gaze sharpening into bright awareness. She had James's green eyes and Catherine's delicate features, and her personality emerged quickly as she proved herself a spirited, curious baby who hated being alone and loved being the center of attention. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling softly outside and Grace sleeping peacefully in her cradle, James pulled Catherine onto his lap before the fire. "I have something for you," he said, producing a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside was a locket, silver and beautifully wrought, with 3 initials engraved on the front, J, C, and G. "It's for you to put our family inside," James explained, showing her how to open it. "See, there's room for a lock of Grace's hair on one side. I thought we could get a photograph made when we go to town next spring, something small enough to fit on the other side." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as she touched the delicate engraving. "It's beautiful, thank you." "Thank you," James said fervently, holding her close. "For fighting to survive that accident, for having the courage to leave Boston and start over, for giving me a chance when you thought you had nothing to offer, for Grace, for everything." Catherine kissed him, deep and slow, tasting salt from their mingled tears. "We made something beautiful together," she whispered against his lips. "Despite everything that tried to prevent it, we made a family." Grace stirred in her cradle, making the soft, snuffling sounds that meant she would wake soon. James and Catherine moved together to pick her up, standing side by side as they looked down at their daughter. "I used to think my life was over," Catherine said softly, "that the accident had stolen any chance I had at happiness, but it brought me here to you and to her. I wouldn't change anything, not a single painful moment, because they all led to this." "Neither would I," James agreed. He lifted Grace into his arms, cradling her against his chest as she blinked up at him with sleepy confusion. "They said you'd never conceive a child," he murmured, more to himself than anyone. "But I'm holding our daughter and thanking heaven for every miracle that brought us to this moment." Spring arrived with its usual dramatic transformation, the frozen landscape melting into green life. Catherine's strength returned fully, and she fell back into the rhythms of ranch life with Grace strapped to her back in a carrier James had fashioned from soft leather. The baby seemed to love the movement and fresh air, gurgling happily as Catherine worked in the garden or fed the chickens. Hope, the calf they had saved during that winter blizzard, had grown into a fine young cow and followed Grace around like a devoted guardian. James laughed at the sight of the two of them together, the baby and the bovine, both survivors who had defied expectations. As Grace approached her first birthday, Catherine found herself thinking about the future with excitement rather than dread. She and James talked about expanding the ranch, maybe hiring help, so James would not work quite so hard. They discussed teaching Grace to ride as soon as she was old enough, about the lessons Catherine could give her from the primers that had belonged to James's mother. "You want more children?" James asked one evening as they watched Grace toddle unsteadily across the floor, determined to walk despite her frequent tumbles. Catherine considered the question carefully. The pregnancy and birth had been difficult, and Dr. Patterson had warned that subsequent pregnancies might carry even greater risks. But watching Grace, seeing the joy she brought to their lives, made Catherine's heart ache with possibility. "I don't know if my body can safely carry another child," she said honestly. "But if it happens, I'd welcome it. And if it doesn't, we have Grace and we have each other. That's enough for a full life." "More than enough," James agreed, pulling her close. "But whatever comes, we'll face it together." Grace's first birthday was celebrated with the entire town turning out for a party at the ranch. Margaret had baked an elaborate cake, and the house was filled with laughter and conversation. Catherine watched James swing their daughter into the air, both of them laughing as Grace shrieked with delight, and felt her heart swell with contentment. She thought about the young woman who had arrived in Mineral Point 2 years earlier, broken and certain her life was over. That woman could never have imagined this moment, this full and beautiful life. The journey from Boston to Wisconsin, from despair to joy, had been longer and harder than any physical distance. But she had made it, had survived and thrived and built something precious. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Catherine stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. James came up behind her, Grace dozing on his shoulder, and wrapped his free arm around Catherine's waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Catherine said. "How far we've come, how grateful I am, how much I love this life we've built." "I love it too," James said simply. "Every single moment, the hard ones and the easy ones, because they're all ours." Grace stirred and reached for Catherine with a sleepy murmur of "Mama." Catherine took her daughter, breathing in her sweet baby scent, and felt tears prick her eyes. "I never thought I'd hear that word directed at me," she whispered. "Never thought I'd have this blessing." "But you do," James said firmly. "And she has you, the strongest, bravest mother a child could ask for." They stood together as the stars emerged, a family united by love and perseverance and faith in possibilities others had dismissed as impossible. The ranch spread out before them, their home and their legacy, and Catherine knew with bone-deep certainty that they would face whatever came next together. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The ranch prospered under James's careful management and Catherine's organizational skills. They expanded the herd, built a new barn, and eventually hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Catherine continued teaching, now with Grace toddling beside her as the older children practiced their letters. When Grace was 3, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. The news brought joy tinged with anxiety, but this pregnancy proved easier than the first. Catherine was stronger, her body more prepared, and Dr. Patterson monitored her closely throughout. The birth was still difficult, but faster, and in May of 1876 they welcomed a son into the family. James held his newborn son with tears streaming down his face, his voice thick with emotion as he thanked heaven once again for the blessings they had been given. They named the boy William, after James's grandfather, and he proved to be a quieter, more contemplative child than his spirited sister. Grace was initially suspicious of the new baby, but her jealousy melted the first time William wrapped his tiny fist around her finger. She became fiercely protective of her little brother, insisting on helping with everything from diaper changes to feedings. As the children grew, the house filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Grace inherited her mother's quick mind and her father's steady determination, while William showed an early aptitude for music and a gentle way with animals. They grew up helping on the ranch, learning to ride and rope and care for the land that would one day be theirs. Catherine never forgot the darkness of those months in Boston when she thought her life was over. She carried that memory like a talisman, a reminder of how far she had come and how precious the life she had built truly was. On difficult days, when the children were quarreling or money was tight or the work seemed endless, she would remember the young woman who thought she had nothing to offer and smile at how wrong those doctors had been. James built the ranch into one of the most successful in the region, known for quality stock and fair dealing. But his greatest pride was always his family, the miracle wife who had defied medical prognosis, and the children who filled his days with purpose and joy. He never took a single moment for granted, never forgot how close he had come to living a lonely, isolated life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, James took Catherine riding to the highest point on the ranch, the same spot they had visited during their courtship. The children were with Margaret in town, giving them a rare afternoon alone. "Do you remember what I told you up here?" James asked as they stood looking out over the land. "That first time I brought you here, you said there were different ways to build a legacy," Catherine recalled. "That a partnership was about more than children." "I was right about that," James said. "But I was also wrong because we did build our family, not in the way anyone expected, but we did it, and it's more than I ever dreamed possible." Catherine leaned against him, breathing in the familiar scent of him mixed with prairie grass and sunshine. "They said I'd never conceive a child," she said softly. "But we have 2 beautiful children and a life full of love. We defied every expectation and built something miraculous." "We did," James agreed. He turned to face her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "And I thank heaven every single day for the stubborn, courageous woman who refused to accept the limitations others tried to place on her." They kissed there on the hilltop, husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. Below them, the ranch spread out in all its hard-won beauty, the home they had built together through faith and persistence and love. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they mounted their horses and rode home together, toward the house where their children waited and the life they had created against all odds. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility, a testament to the power of hope and the miracles that can happen when 2 people refuse to give up on each other or themselves. Catherine had learned that sometimes the path life takes is different from the one imagined, but no less beautiful for the unexpected turns. She had learned that love could heal wounds deeper than any physical injury, and that family could be built on foundations of faith and determination. Most importantly, she had learned that she was stronger than anyone had ever given her credit for, including herself. Years later, when Grace and William were grown with children of their own, Catherine would sit on that same porch where she and James had spent so many evenings and watch the grandchildren play. She would think about that terrified young woman on the stagecoach, running from heartbreak and certain her life was over, and smile at how gloriously wrong she had been. The doctors who said she would never conceive had been proven spectacularly incorrect. The former fiancé who deemed her unworthy had missed out on a lifetime of love and partnership. The society matrons who pitied her had never experienced the depth of joy that came from building something real and lasting. Catherine had found her home in the Wisconsin frontier, in a limestone house on a cattle ranch, with a cowboy who saw her value when she could not see it herself. She had borne 2 children her body was supposedly incapable of carrying, had built a family and a legacy that would endure for generations. On quiet nights, when James held her close and they listened to the prairie wind singing through the grass, Catherine would whisper prayers of gratitude for every twist of fate that brought her to this life. For the accident that seemed like tragedy but led her to Mineral Point. For the aunt who offered refuge when she needed it most. For the cowboy with gentle hands and a generous heart who taught her that her worth was not measured by her ability to bear children, even as he held their daughter and thanked heaven for the miracle they had been given. It was a life built on faith and love and refusal to accept the limitations others tried to impose. It was a life that proved medical certainty could be wrong and hope could triumph over despair. It was, Catherine thought as she drifted to sleep in her husband's arms with grandchildren dreaming in the rooms down the hall, a life worth every struggle it took to claim it. The story of the woman they said would never conceive, and the cowboy who held their daughter and thanked heaven became legend in Mineral Point. Parents told it to their children as proof that miracles still happened, that love could overcome impossible odds, that faith and determination could reshape destiny itself. But for Catherine and James, it was simply their life. The beautiful, ordinary, miraculous life they built together in the wild Wisconsin frontier, day by day, choice by choice, moment by precious moment. A life that began with despair and blossomed into joy, with laughter echoing through limestone walls and children running through prairie grass and love deepening with each passing year. They had proven that family was not about biology alone, but about the bonds forged through commitment and care. They had shown that a woman's worth extended far beyond her womb, and that a man's legacy could be measured in kindness rather than progeny alone. And when children did come, against all odds and expectations, they were cherished not as validation, but as the beautiful bonus they truly were. As Catherine grew old beside the cowboy who had loved her without conditions, who had seen her value when she could not see it herself, she knew with absolute certainty that her life had been exactly what it was meant to be. Every joy, every sorrow, every unexpected turn had led her to this place, this family, this love. And that, she thought as she watched the sunset paint the sky gold one more time, was the greatest miracle of all. Not the children she bore against medical impossibility, though she treasured them beyond measure. Not the ranch they built or the legacy they created, though both brought deep satisfaction. The greatest miracle was finding someone who loved her exactly as she was, who helped her see her own strength and worth, who walked beside her through every challenge and celebrated every triumph. They said she would never conceive a child. The cowboy held their daughter, and their son, and eventually their grandchildren, and thanked heaven every day for the stubborn woman who refused to accept impossible as an answer. Together, they had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love and the miracles that happen when 2 people believe in each other and refuse to give up. The sun set on the Granger Ranch, painting the limestone house golden in the fading light. Inside, generations of love and laughter and life continued, an unbroken chain stretching from that first impossible pregnancy to children and grandchildren who would never know a world where their grandmother was told she had no value. Catherine and James had rewritten that story, had proved it gloriously wrong, and in doing so had created something beautiful and lasting. As twilight deepened into night and stars emerged over the Wisconsin prairie, the old house settled into peaceful quiet. Catherine slept in James's arms, the same place she had found refuge and love and home for so many years. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying stories of miracles and love across the vast frontier landscape, ensuring that the tale of the woman they said would never conceive, and the cowboy who held their daughter would live on, inspiring hope in every heart that heard it.